You told me other day that you think children's section is the most important in a bookstore. Can you talk about this specific point?
Yes, I mean, we obviously sell books to all people of all ages if they are interested in reading and wish to engage with a book. And that as a retailer is an extraordinary thing, from the youngest age to the oldest age. But I think within our stores, bookstores, the children's sections, and I would include within that what we call young adult, so teenagers, is the heart of the store. And that's for some obvious reasons. Children read at a very fast pace. Parents have an aspiration that children do read. We know that if you read as a child, you will have a higher educational attainment and your prospects in life are much improved. So parents will support the child reading. And then as you advance through into later ages, into teenage years and into early adulthood, you have the time and the curiosity to read hugely. And also as you get into these young adult phase of life, as you gain independence, you need a safe space in which to meet. It's not just the bar. You don't want these sort of quite adult spaces, and a bookstore is an ideal place in which, particularly, maybe they don't exist in Brazil, the shy person, the introverted person, but it is a safe space and it's a social space. And again, it's a time of life when you can read, you have time. Once you start having families, your career is working, you're tired, you're hardworking, and there's much less actual free time and space to read, even if you're a reader. But not these kids, they read masses. So at Waterstones and at Barnes & Noble now, I've always preached that we increase the size of our children's sections. It particularly increased the size devoted to teenagers and young adults, and create really good ranges for them, much more space and much higher numbers of titles of books, and that should include all of those types of reading that they respond to. So not just conventional reading, but manga and graphic novels and all of these things that young kids like. And if you do this, you will have energy in your store. It's not just that it's commercially important, but it brings energy and vibrancy and excitement into a store because you've got lots of kids in it. And by kids, I think I really mean teenagers in particular. And this energy and pace makes everybody else who comes into the store feel better about it. It makes the bookstore not the place for old people, the place that doesn't need to exist anymore now that we have Amazon and the internet. It makes the bookstore relevant and interesting and social and vibrant. And this is about children's sections. I would say the physical space that we devote to these sections now is probably at Waterstones double what it was when I started, literally double. And now very much more at Barnes & Noble as well. The challenge then is what gets squeezed, what has less space, because obviously the size of the store doesn't change. And for me, it is to remove from our stores anything that's technical and boring. So if it's the kind of book where, you know, a reference book, a medical textbook, all of these kind of books, I think the internet sells these the best. You know what it is, you're told to get it, you go on the internet, Amazon or us will sell it to you. Bookstores are places in which to discover. And that by taking away those books, we have more space for places of discovery, and nowhere is that sort of more vibrant and alive and dynamic than in our children's sections, and particularly our young adult one.
Everyone agrees that a bookstore should offer to customer pleasant experience. No, in this process, what works best? Coffee bar, toys for the children, play, literary events. What works better?
I think, I mean, it's certainly true that we are trying to have to create social spaces that are enjoyable and to which the customer can respond. What that means, I think, depends on the size of your store, what I call the geography of the store. So the layout, is it short, fat, thin, tall? There are things that space allows you to do that if you don't have the luxury of a large store that you can't do. In my own stores, Daunt Books, which have a very nice reputation in London, I think the best bookstore in London is my bookstore. But I don't have space for a coffee. I just don't have space. I can't have enough books in my store if I had a coffee store. So I think you have to just set your priorities and then work your way down through them. If you've got space, of course, a coffee place, particularly if you do it well, is really nice. It gives you a place to sit, to read, and the smell of coffee. And if you do it well, it's great. But only if you have the space. I would never compromise the integrity of my stock in order to have one. But that definition of what is necessary for the integrity of stock depends on your customer base. If you have a very intellectual metropolitan customer, they probably need, big sections, and they read very widely. In a more, less intellectual environment, they don't need so much. Give them coffee. So I think that is for each individual bookseller to make a judgment. And that's why at Waterstones and at Barnes & Noble, where we have lots of stores, we devolve that responsibility absolutely to the local store and the local store manager. They have to make the decisions, which books they have and how they allocate their space and what matters within their communities. And there is, I would argue, for example, that there is much more difference within the United Kingdom and within the United States between our shops than there is between the two countries. You're trying to, at every point, create the right store for the right community. And it's very complicated and it's intuitive, and there isn't a right answer. There are lots of right answers.
Why can a bookstore do better selling just books without games and toys and stuff like that?
I personally am of the view, and I am a bookseller. I am passionate about books. I care really fundamentally only about books. But I also believe that a bookstore which has other things in it can be a better bookstore. Again, you have to make a judgment on your size, but people come in to enjoy our stores, and they come in to buy presents, gifts. I think if you think about in most bookstores, what percentage of the books are being bought by the reader who is going to read them themselves, and what percentage is being bought for somebody else. That can vary, but I think we should aspire to having our customers come to us for gifts. And also that everybody who reads tends to have a commonality around writing, and therefore journals and pens. They have a commonality around, I think, gifting. So you need wrapping paper and greetings cards. They definitely have a commonality in the children's sections about stimulation and engagement, and therefore educational toys and games are important. They're important developmentally, and we should have them, not make them go somewhere else for them. And I think if you do these things well, you create a a more visually attractive environment, which is important, and also a better commercial environment. The ideal, my ideal in my bookstore is that I sell lots of things that are not a book, but that my customers only think of me as a bookstore, that it's almost something that happens serendipitously because they're there, but they don't ever particularly focus on them. But they know in the back of their mind that when they need a journal, they'll go to the bookstore, buy a book, and then pick up a journal, a notebook, a pen, all the things that are associated with creativity and thought and writing and paper.
Should creating large bookstore chains still be a goal for booksellers? I mean, what frequent risks do they take in taking this step?
I think there are things that large chain booksellers can do that independent small booksellers cannot. And there's a huge financial risk attached to opening a large bookstore. There's a big capital cost. And both of those things are obviously difficult for the individual to do. But when you've got a big company, you can do it. I do think there is benefit and purpose in having more bookstores rather than less. And if you need the big bookseller to open up lots of stores, particularly in, where it requires big investment. In Barnes & Noble, we're opening a store this month, next week. It's 28,000 square feet, 3,000 square meters. These are big stores. That's not something an independent bookseller will do easily. It's a big risk. So I think the chain bookseller, the big bookseller, is an important engine of growth. But I also think that they will only be successful if they have the ethos of the independent bookseller. And that's really what we've been doing at Waterstones and Barnes & Noble. And what I was trying to talk about earlier, these are fundamental principles of running a good independent bookstore. And we bring that to the chain. Then you start having something quite interesting. And you can also invest more in the internet, the social media, the distribution, the infrastructure which supports the stores. But also all of us need lots of bookstores so that there is enough publishing, and also all of the infrastructure which supports any one store is better the more that there are. So I'm not trying to ever compete with another bookstore. I never open up where there is already a bookstore. We coexist and we reinforce each other's strengths.
How can make difference on digital selling?
I mean, it's different markets have different dynamics going on. In the United Kingdom and the United States, Amazon is astonishingly good at the logistics. Also, we have no protection on price at all, which exists in most European markets, for example. And therefore Amazon, because it wants the customer and it wants to sell them other things, will use the book as a loss leader. So you can't compete with them, really. What you can do, and you can compete with them on, is intelligence. And you use your online presence to be engaging and intelligent and support the relationship with the reader that you primarily have within your bookstore. We do that at Barnes & Noble with e-reading as well. We have our own e-reader, the Nook that competes with the Kindle. That's fine. We got our own audio offer that competes with Amazon. All of these things are fine. We should do them. They promote reading. They're about reading. We're a bookseller. But it isn't our purpose in life. Our purpose in life is running really good bookstores.
A personal question. Do you remember your first time on a bookstore?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, I'm so old, as you can see. I grew up in a time in the United Kingdom when there weren't that many bookstores and people went to the public library. So what I remember is going with my mother mainly to the public library. We borrow a book, 2 books, we read them, we take them back, we borrow the next 2. And that was my engagement with books, was the library. You didn't have so many books at home. Through the increase in prosperity in the country, bookstores started opening, and then the middle classes with a bit more money start buying books. They have books in their homes. And so my sort of engagement with books came quite probably when I was more like a student than before that. And then the bookstores really were opening, and they were exciting, and they were big, and you could go in and spend lots of time and in a store. And I certainly remember as a student, the bookstore is a place that you spend a lot of time, but you never bought anything. I had no money.
What do you read? What kind of book? For pleasure, not for business.
Well, I think the two are generally the same. I read lots of fiction all the time because that matters commercially, and there's a pile in front of me of maybe 10 books. I will read enough of them to know whether I've got something exciting there. They're mainly new authors, people we don't know. I don't read the books from the great authors. I don't have time. And then I always read something very big and very serious because that's what I really enjoy doing. I'm reading Power Broker, the most amazing biography. Fantastic.
Oh.
Robert Caro.
I want to thank you for this time, and I hope that you come to Brazil.
Like to come to Brazil. I mean, and I think just as a final thing, that we in the United Kingdom some years ago, and now recently in the United States, and particularly with the pandemic, perhaps, booksellers felt under siege. They felt Amazon was irresistible, that we didn't have a place in the retail world, that it was all too difficult and too expensive, and sales are going down, digital, online, and that there were going to be inevitably fewer booksellers and fewer booksellers and fewer booksellers. And that isn't true. When we're confident and we're running good bookstores, and that's quite a collective thing, all of us have to become confident and focus on delivering these really good bookstores. People love bookstores, absolutely love them. And we have a strength, an inner strength, if we're executing well, that very few other retailers have. And we're finding in the United States now, and we've absolutely had it with Waterstones in the United Kingdom, we can keep a bookstore open, profitable, full of people in the most difficult retail environments where every other store has closed down. We're still there, we're still prosperous, we're still confident, and we're running really good stores. And I think it's that once one makes and sets that standard of ambition for the environment of your store, customers respond. And I truly believe that the bookstore has a absolute long-term permanent part of our retail landscapes in both the United States and the United Kingdom, and I sincerely hope in all these other countries like Brazil.